He doesn't want power. He doesn't seek control. He has no interest in being a hero. And that's what makes him dangerous. Because in a world where everyone is running from themselves, Monkey D. Luffy is fully at peace. He doesn't follow laws, codes, or plans. He follows something far rarer, himself. Not out of pride, not out of rebellion, but out of love. Luffy loves being who he is. That's his superpower. Carl Rogers once said, "What I am is good enough if I would only be it openly." Luffy lives that truth, loudly, constantly, unapologetically, and that level of self-acceptance, that scares people. Because when someone no longer fears judgment, rejection, or even death, they can't be controlled. And yet, people follow him, not because he asks them to, but because they wish they could be like him. This isn't just a story about a pirate. It's about a man who walks through the world with nothing but joy, instinct, and love, and how that threatens everything we were taught to obey. We call him a hero, because it's easier than accepting the truth. He defeats tyrants. He protects people. He inspires loyalty. We assume he must be fighting for justice, but Luffy never claims to be a savior. He never claims to fight for good. He doesn't believe in justice. He believes in people, his people. When Nami fell to her knees in Arlong Park, shattered by guilt and years of abuse, she barely managed to whisper, "Help me." Luffy didn't ask questions. He didn't give a moral speech. He just put his hat on her head, the most sacred object he owns, and walked forward. Not because it was noble, because it was true to him. When Robin, persecuted, used, silenced, finally broke and cried, "I want to live," he didn't weigh the political cost. He didn't think about the consequences. He simply smiled and told the world, "Let's go rescue our friend." Even in Dressrosa, when strangers called him a hero, he shrugged it off with a grin. "I'm not a hero. Heroes share meat." That wasn't arrogance. That was honesty. Carl Rogers called this congruence. When what you feel, what you believe, and what you do are in total alignment. Luffy lives in a state of permanent congruence. He doesn't censor himself. He doesn't fake concern. He doesn't say what's expected. He says what's real. But imagine doing that in the real world. Imagine being that honest in your job, in your relationships, with your friends. What if, in a work meeting, instead of nodding to a bad idea, you said, "This doesn't feel right to me. I won't support it." Not to be difficult, but because your values don't allow you to pretend. What if, in a relationship, you stopped trying to be liked and started being known? What if you said, "This is who I am. I won't shrink for you"? What if, with your friends, you stopped playing roles? The cool one, the quiet one, the smart one, and simply existed as yourself, unfiltered, unstrategic, unafraid. The truth is, most of us don't want to be Luffy. We want to admire him from a distance, because living like him would require the kind of courage most people were never taught to use. Because once you live from insight, not obedience, from love, not fear, you can't be controlled, you can't be manipulated, you can't be broken. And that's why Luffy isn't a hero. He's something much more rare, a human being fully alive. Society doesn't know what to do with someone like Luffy, because Luffy doesn't need anything from it. Not approval, not status, not safety. He doesn't want to be accepted. He wants to be free. Carl Rogers believed that most people live behind a mask, constantly adjusting who they are to fit in. At work, with family, in love. He called it incongruence, the psychological tension that happens when we betray our true self to survive in a social world. From a young age, we're taught to please, to follow rules, to avoid upsetting others. And little by little, we stop asking what we feel. We start asking, what should I do to be loved? Luffy never asked that question. When the world government tried to make an example of Nico Robin, branding her a criminal, silencing her history, Luffy didn't care. He didn't ask what she had done. He asked, "Do you want to live?" When Vivi asked him to keep her secret for the sake of Alabasta's political safety, he understood her pain. But he still cried out her name at the top of his lungs. Because to Luffy, love is not hidden. Love is loud. He doesn't protect his image. He doesn't manage perception. He just is. But what happens when we try that in real life? Imagine telling your boss, "This job doesn't align with who I am anymore." Imagine telling your partner, "I don't want to fix this. I want to leave because I've outgrown who I became with you." Imagine telling your parents, "I don't believe in what you taught me. I need to live differently now." We admire authenticity, but we punish it. Erich Fromm called this the paradox of modern freedom. We escape authoritarian control only to become prisoners of conformity. We trade obedience for performance, and the result is the same. We lose ourselves. That's why Luffy is treated like a threat, not because he's dangerous to others, but because he reminds us of what we gave up. In Water 7, the world government didn't fear Luffy's fists. They feared his refusal to negotiate. They offered him power. He laughed. They threatened him. He stood still. They erased his crew from the record. He burned the flag of justice itself. Viktor Frankl believed that true freedom is found in the space between stimulus and response, in choosing how to act, not based on fear or pressure, but based on meaning. Luffy never reacts. He responds from joy, from instinct, from love, and that cannot be controlled. So ask yourself, where are you betraying yourself just to be good or successful? What dreams has the system silenced in you because they weren't practical, profitable, or acceptable? And who would you become if you stopped performing and just lived? Everyone wants to be free until they see the price. We admire Luffy's courage, his honesty, his joy, but we forget what it cost him. He refused to follow the path the world offered. He refused to bow to power. And in return, the world punished him. He lost Ace, not because he was weak, but because he believed his love alone could overcome everything. He couldn't save Sabo from being taken. He couldn't protect Uta from the darkness in her own voice. He keeps moving forward, but the weight doesn't vanish. He just carries it differently. Carl Rogers warned that when you live authentically, you will feel profoundly alone. Not because you're wrong, but because few people can walk that path with you. Luffy doesn't change to make others comfortable. That's why so many leave him, and why those who stay forever. Frankl called it the tragic optimism, the ability to say yes to life despite loss, guilt, suffering. And that's what Luffy embodies. Not a perfect life, but a meaningful one. Now think about your own life. Have you ever silenced your truth to keep a relationship alive? Have you ever stayed in a job because being safe felt easier than being honest? Have you ever smiled when you wanted to scream? Fromm said we fear freedom because it comes with responsibility, the responsibility to choose, to lose, to risk love without guarantees. Luffy accepts that risk. That's why he loves loudly, fails loudly, lives loudly. But most of us, we whisper through life. To be free like Luffy is not to be happy all the time. It's to be at peace with the cost of living without masks. And sometimes, that cost is everything. Luffy never tries to change anyone. He doesn't argue. He doesn't persuade. He doesn't even explain himself. He just is. And somehow, by being fully himself, he changes everyone around him. Zoro, the lone swordsman who once lived only for revenge, found someone he could die for. Sanji, the broken prince who couldn't accept love, finally met someone who didn't need him to prove his worth. Robin, who had spent her whole life being hunted and discarded, was asked just one thing. Do you want to live? And she did. Even enemies soften around Luffy. Mihawk, Crocodile, Law, even Kaido. They don't understand him, but they respect him. Because you can't argue with someone who doesn't lie. You can only watch and wonder why you're not like them. Pause. Carl Rogers called this unconditional positive regard. When one person is fully present, fully accepting, without judgment, it allows others to return to themselves. Luffy doesn't love people for what they can do. He loves them for who they are, even when they can't see it yet. And that kind of love heals. In the real world, most of us try to change others by convincing them to work harder, to be better, to love us back. We weaponize our kindness. We negotiate our presence. We perform care to get closeness. But what if we didn't? What if we simply stood firm in who we are and let that presence do the work? Think about the people you admire most. Chances are they didn't change your life with a lecture. They changed it because they showed you a way of being that made you question everything you thought you had to be. That's what Luffy does, over and over again. Not with control, not with power, but with unshakable freedom. Luffy doesn't want to control the world. He just doesn't want the world to control him. He doesn't want a throne. He doesn't want an army. He doesn't want a legacy. He wants a ship, a sky, and the freedom to laugh with his friends. And that is enough to make him public enemy number one. Because systems don't know how to handle people they can't manipulate. They can imprison rebels. They can corrupt leaders. But someone who can't be bribed, blackmailed, or broken, that's a glitch in the machine. In Eni's lobby, Luffy doesn't bargain with the world government. He burns their flag. In Sabaody, he punches a celestial dragon, not to make a statement, but because the man shot his friend. In Impel Down, he breaks into the world's most secure prison, not to protest injustice, but to save his brother. Luffy doesn't fight for causes. He fights for people, and that terrifies those in power. In the real world, obedience is rewarded. Tame your voice, you'll be promoted. Stay quiet, you'll be loved. Follow rules, you'll be safe. And so we learn to shrink. We trade pieces of our truth for comfort. We internalize the fear of being too much. Luffy never shrinks. He never edits himself for safety. He never tones down his presence to fit in. And that's why the world reacts so violently to him. He doesn't play by their rules, and he wins anyway. Frankel wrote that meaning is found when we stop seeking to control life and instead respond to it from values. Luffy doesn't resist the system with ideology. He bypasses it completely. He chooses to live, and his very existence becomes proof that maybe we don't need to obey as much as we thought. He doesn't speak of revolutions, but wherever he goes, the world begins to change. Luffy never wanted to be king, not in the way we understand it. He doesn't command, he doesn't strategize, he doesn't lead meetings. He just moves, instinctively, honestly, and people move with him. Zoro followed him after a single conversation. Robin joined him after years of betrayal, because for the first time someone didn't ask her to change. Even Law, hardened and cynical, ended up trusting him. Not because Luffy earned it, but because Luffy never pretended to. That's the paradox. The one who doesn't seek followers gains the most. The one who doesn't want to rule inspires loyalty beyond reason. Carl Rogers said that when someone becomes fully congruent, when their outer life matches their inner truth, they emit something powerful. Presence, not authority, not persuasion, just presence. And that kind of presence doesn't need to convince. It magnetizes. In our world, leaders are taught to project confidence, to build a brand, to win people over. But what if leadership is not something you build? What if it's something that happens when you stop pretending? Think about it. Who are the people you'd follow into the fire? Not the ones who promised safety. The ones who made you feel seen. The ones who reminded you of who you are. That's what Luffy is. A mirror, a compass, a spark. He doesn't want to rule the seas. He just wants to be the freest man alive. And in a world starved for truth, that kind of freedom looks like royalty. So they call him the Pirate King. But the crown was never the goal. The crown simply followed the man who no longer needed it. He doesn't preach. He doesn't lead armies. He doesn't even try to be understood. Luffy just lives, fully, loudly, freely. And in doing so, he becomes the most dangerous force in the world, because freedom like that is contagious. Because presence like that exposes every mask we've learned to wear. He never tells others what to do, but somehow they change. Not because he leads them, but because he gives them permission to lead themselves. Carl Rogers believed that if a person is loved, truly loved, without condition or agenda, they begin to heal. Luffy doesn't heal with words. He heals with being. From warned that we fear our own freedom, that we run from it because it makes us responsible for who we become. But Luffy runs toward it, smiling. Frankel said the ultimate freedom is the ability to choose your attitude, even in suffering. Luffy chose joy, even in prison, even in loss, even in grief. He is not a hero. He is not a king. He is not a symbol. He is a man who never abandoned himself. And maybe that's why we love him. Because deep down, we're not looking for someone to save us. We're looking for someone to remind us that we're allowed to save ourselves. Maybe the most dangerous thing in the world is someone who's truly free.